Hello, Bubbleshin. Alrighty, everyone, hello, and welcome back to another episode of my nonsense, and definitely also, as you can see, a little something of B-Lock's nonsense. B-Lock, I think, is looking for food, because neither of us have had lunch yet. Hi, B-Will. Oh, angry fat man. Oh, he's angry and he's fat. But now, full disclosure, I filmed this video once, decided I didn't like it, and didn't have time to film it again last week, so here we are today with a little discussion on where exactly the intersection between my work as an academic / spiritual writer and a fantasy writer overlap, and also whether or not being a fantasy writer can help you at all with magic in general, or just being fantasy minded can help you with magic in general. After being laid low with both a head cold and also just rising distress over the fact that this country is circling the drain rapidly, the thoughts were a little discombobulated, but we got the thoughts back together today. Because as you may very well guess, I am, as I said, a writer, specifically a writer of these two books right here. My name is Sarah Streisand, and among being a writer, I'm also an educator, a content creator, a Christian witch, and all of these other things. And these two books, this one that just came out, are all about exactly how Christian witchcraft works, how Christianity and witchcraft can even go in the same sentence, and how you can navigate what it means to take on that kind of spiritual path, which is a lot of what the second book's about. First book is all about just how to be a witch and a Christian at the same time, from a biblical standpoint, from a traditional standpoint, and everything else in between. But again, as I am, a fantasy writer, that does mean I write fantasy books, and I haven't shown these very often, but this is my debut fantasy series, The Glass Witch being book 1, The Wraith Queen book 2. There will one day be a third book, once I have the headspace to actually dedicate to writing that properly, which is not this year for a myriad of reasons. So, if you are someone who enjoys all of that kind of talk about witchcraft, about theology and Christianity, about fantasy and all these other things, I invite you to go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell, because we do post a video here every single Friday. And if you want to get these videos 2 weeks early and ad-free, all you gotta do is join my Patreon, where I not only post videos like this, but also a ton of other good educational content on witchcraft and theory and practice and theology and a lot of other stuff. But now, as we are talking about this, I really want to just kind of talk through what I have been juggling in terms of writerly projects so far this year, what I wanted to start with, and how doing the writing work, the fantasy work, has also been at the same time contributing to my magical and theological and, other such understanding. So whereas I started these two series, these books rather, fresh out of my graduate program at Emerson College, I got a master's degree in popular fiction and publishing, and my whole thing really was that I wanted to write fantasy books. So right when I was done with that program, I wrote this book, and it doesn't really have much to do with witchcraft. This series is more about my kind of just working through the vibes of being multicultural, basically, as I am both American on my dad's side and Slovenian on my mom's side. My mom is an immigrant, and so this just explores a lot of those themes of like finding out cultural belonging, cultural identity, deciding where your actual personal loyalties versus national loyalties lie, and so on and so forth. It's a very interesting story to me, at least anyway, as the writer. And as a writer, I'm one that pulls no punches, so this one somehow got even crazier than this one, and it's pretty intense, and the people who have read it seem to like it a lot. So if you like, high fantasy world building, heavy stuff like that, you're gonna like the series. But again, this year, I'm dealing with a bunch of crazy shit. I am dealing with starting the Ministry of Christ under the Order of Divine Mysticism, which we finally just got all of our financial and legal paperwork in order. We are officially a nonprofit ministry, and this ministry is one that is by and for Christian witches. I'll post the link to the Discord down below, so if y'all are interested in a more digital, kind of almost church-like community, you can find that there. But beyond that, I'm also planning my fucking wedding, which is its own special hell, because, having to coordinate so many appointments and pay so many people to do so many things is crazy. And let me tell you, as a wedding person, I've already cut out so much of what people normally do. I had to kind of convince myself to even book a photographer. I was about to be like, fuck it, just get your phone out and start clicking away, but no. That at least, fine. I got a photographer, but like, I'm doing my own hair, I'm doing my own makeup. The venue and the fucking food catering are basically like one lump package, so I didn't have to do that separately. We're doing our own music playlist, no fucking DJs, on and on and on, right? Like, I'm already cutting out so much of what is normally required to plan events like this, and yet it is still just ungodly. And it's only going to get worse because the bulk of what I have to do is craft, and that is a summer project, you know what I mean? So it's... So two massive things taking my attention, on top of being a professor, on top of running my own social media and stuff in the midst of this burning hellfire, all these other things. It meant that as much as I wanted to write the third book of The Glass Witch and finish that series off this year, no, that was not going to happen. I knew that if I was going to write a fiction book this year, it had to be a fun, goofy little whatever, a one-off, a simple thing, not very world-building heavy, based in this world, and just exploring some theological religious themes of who is worthy of God's grace and love, and also how to deal with the feeling of abandonment by one's gods. These are happening at the same time. And so to tell you a little bit about the book idea itself, it is a vampire/witch romance novel that takes place in, Rhode Island, and is really just schmoving through, it's a story that takes place over the span of maybe 4 months, and it's about a vampire with absolutely nothing to live for, yet who is afraid to die because he's afraid to go to hell, and a witch who just wants to get back at her horrible ex-boyfriend who basically stole all her magical secrets and is using them for his own gain after basically throwing her to the side. And so Vampire Man is a super old ass, vampire from the friggin' Dracula days, dead ass. And then the witch is just a 33-year-old PhD candidate who is also a Catholic, a Polish, child of Polish immigrants, and an occultist/witch. So, when we talk about writing and we talk about all that kind of stuff, you'll see a lot of memes about being a writer and how our search histories are just incomprehensible to anyone trying to figure out what the hell it is that we do with our time. Our search histories probably have gotten all of us on at least a few lists for Googling insane shit. And I mean, hey, it comes with the territory. I've never been in pretty much 99% of the situations I write about, but I have to know something or else nothing is going to make sense. I see you. Yeah, that's right. I see you looking. Oh no, what are you doing, Mr. Boy? What? And so, before I started writing this month, I do plan to basically wham bam thank you ma'am write this thing in 3 months, because I've written quite a few books at this point, and kind of have the process down. But to write it, I had to research not only just stuff about vampires and vampire lore and history, right? The whole Ottoman and Romanian/Wallachian struggle, in this point in time for the origins and all this kind of stuff. But I also had to look more into magic. Specifically, I had to look into folk magic. And I just so happened to find the perfect book for that, for my witch character, Polish Folk Magic by Joanna Tarnowska. I have gotten through a good chunk of this, not all of it yet, but I have gotten through a good, I want to say over a third of it, and have, kind of flipped through and skimmed the rest. This isn't a book review on this yet, but I will say it is really cool, and it is really insightful, and helps me get a lot of material for that character. And so has looking into other grimoires, right? The Book of Oberon, which is a more Elizabethan era, English grimoire that seems to be almost more Anglican, and borrows a lot from Catholicism, because at that time Catholicism was really scandalous. And also the 3 books of occult philosophy, which was sent to me by one of my followers, one of my patrons, in which, again, I cannot thank you enough, because look at this thing. It is a beast. This book is ridiculous because it's 3 books in one. But exploring these kinds of grimoires, understanding, the kind of stuff that doesn't go into just whatever witchcraft shit you can Google, but the old school hardcore magics, all of those go into building a functional magic system, a functional world that helps me make the characters feel more natural and authentic, and just easier to write and easier to establish the boundaries of. And certainly, right, I'm not the first writer to ever do this, right? I'm not the first writer to come in here with some points to make theologically, and then use fantasy or fiction in general to then make those points. C.S. Lewis is the writer of Narnia. He is very well known for doing that. We all know that Aslan is basically just Lion Jesus and so on, and he's also got these other shorter works, right? Mere Christianity, the Screwtape Letters, The Great Divorce, all these other things that a lot of, especially Christian folk, use to kind of explain a lot of moral and theological ideas over time. This is the beauty of fiction, is that you can more directly explore these ideas in a way that doesn't get people hung up on like real life stuff, right? When we talk about like real life and real events, you're always going to have someone with some fuck-ass opinion about, no, it actually went this way, no, it actually went that way, and like propaganda and smear campaigns and up and down and all around. But in fiction, as we see time and time again with stuff like The Hunger Games and The Handmaid's Tale and all these other dystopians, when you get people the hell out of their own preconceived cultural and political notions, they're much more clearly able to see the themes and problems going on with certain things. And the real only challenge is then trying to get them to understand the points here and then connect them back to the reality they live in. That second part is really the part where we lose a lot of people. But for the most part, they still understand the themes, at least, of these stories, and no one really questions that. You know, no one really questions, like, okay, yeah, The Hunger Games is obviously about a fuck-ass government. The Handmaid's Tale is obviously about patriarchy going out of control, like so on and so forth. So, yeah, as a fantasy writer, I definitely do think that, like, my fiction work is a great place for me to kind of sandbox a little bit and make these theological points and explore these theological ideas in a way that still is, you know, entertaining, enjoyable to read, but sticks with people after and gives them that space to work through these ideas and hopefully bring them back to reality, to maybe then implement into their own frameworks and their own states of mind, right? Because, like, while yes, these two books are really cute and fun in that, like, you know, there's a little bridal competition style romance, and then there's, like, you know, a lot of interesting, like, world building intrigue. Like, there's a lot of characters who are all important and all have their own wishes and desires, all kind of fucking each other up in here. They're very obviously about fascism and nationalism, and they're very obviously about propaganda and about, you know, just like interracial existence, international politics, basically geopolitics, and all of these other things. Like, if anyone came away reading this book being like, the bad guy, no, he had a point though, I'd be like, what? Yo, media literacy crisis in full bloom. There is one thing you'll notice though as I hold up books like this, and that is that they don't tell me how to write fiction. They don't tell me how to do this from a tee-hee-ha-ha giggles, it's all fake perspective. These are still real books on magic that real people abide by continuously. These are the folk magic tips that have been written down in real life court cases against witches in Poland. These are the real life spells and formulas of people who did think that this was legit. And what that means is that even if I'm reading it for the sake of trying to make a story more realistic, my brain pieces do communicate with each other, and the stuff that I learned from my writing is still very much stuff that I can then later apply to my magic. Because you bet your ass that while I'm reading the Polish folk magic book, I myself, while I'm not Polish, I am still comparing and contrasting with stuff that I've read from something that is about where I'm from, which is Slovenia, right? Or rather, my family is from. Like, I'm comparing and contrasting the way these things do in fact seem to overlap, and where I can borrow readily from this, from the open parts of this, like in terms of how formulas are spoken, that also match up with what I've learned from stuff like this, right? And I have my own anthropological fieldwork books on specifically Slovenian witchcraft trials and witchcraft superstitions and witchcraft beliefs and how this works and why. Like, these are verbatim, direct testimony from people in Slovenia on what they believe about witches in their communities, that they still believe or they're doing stuff. So all these kinds of things, like, it's not just a history thing, it's not just a writing thing, it very much is stuff that influences and informs how I might from a folk magic perspective, how I might from a folk Catholic perspective, how I might from an occult magician perspective continue to work my own magic. And I guess maybe if I were just like a casual literary fiction writer, or if I were like a science fiction writer, or if I were just like, I don't know, a regular rom-com writer, maybe this reading wouldn't be very significant. But because I am a fantasy writer and also a bit of a lay theologian, a bit of a lay scholar, writing books about that as well, the stuff that I read for books like these absolutely overlap with the stuff I write for books like these. And they go together hand in hand. And as a result, I have so many ideas on a personal level and in a fiction level of how I might continue to orchestrate the magic that I do. And I think this is where I really want to talk about how it is that being a fantasy writer, I feel like, really gives me an edge, and may very well for any other fantasy writers give them an edge as well when it comes to magic. Because a lot of what we do with magic, if you read enough spell formats and you understand enough of how the magic works, you realize that it's really all a matter of convincing yourself and imagining for yourself how it is that the thing you're asking for is going to come to fruition in the world. One very interesting thing in this book that I was reading about was the ideas of sympathetic magic and contagious magic. So sympathetic magic kind of meaning that like goes to like, contagious magic being that like when you come in contact with something or when a piece of something exists, that it can still be acted on as if it is still part of whoever came in contact with it. So that might be a lot, but basically sympathetic magic, right, is kind of looking at ideas and comparing them together and holding ideas together. So, for instance, sure, there might be specific correspondences of a thorny plant like a rose, but if you take the stem of that rose with the thorns on it, thorns as sharp, barbed things are used for wardings, for protection spells, for other stuff like that, because they are sharp, because they fend off things that would try to touch it, right? So that kind of sympathetic magic, right, that hot things might be good for passion and ambition and creativity, that cold things might be good for emotions or all that kind of stuff. That basically tells me that people are taking abstract concepts and giving them a physical, tangible representation, right, that guides the magic. And this is something we've talked about before. This is kind of how really any witchcraft, I feel like, works when we talk about correspondences. Certain things don't mean what they mean just because. An apple isn't associated with love just because. There is centuries of cultural traditions around these things, beliefs related to the color and the shape of them, and so on, that have to do with that. So if we take an abstract concept of love and we say, I really want to bring more love into my life, what does love look like? You pick your item based on that. Does love look like a flower? Does love look like a fruit? Depending on what it is, depends how the ritual goes. If it's a fruit, maybe you eat it, you ingest it, and you internalize that love. If it's a flower, maybe you scatter the petals as if they are little notes going out into the world. You give yourself an image to act the energy out with and basically code into it how you want it to do the thing that you are trying to do. Likewise, contagious magic is what a lot of people think of when they say like, oh, you need like someone's fingernails, you need someone's hair, you need someone's footprint on the ground, right, to do magic on them. You don't need to have a person standing directly in front of you that you want to cast spells on to be able to cast, right? That's kind of that contagious magic, is that if you have something that someone touched and you charm that thing, it will basically, by some psychic connection, impact them. So that is something I found really interesting in here, because through that, you can see how, again, a lot of these things, they're people trying to convince themselves, illustrate to themselves how their magic's going to go. And when I tell you that fantasy writers, fiction writers in general, they have a leg up here, it's because we don't have a problem imagining things. When I see a lot of these big elaborate rituals, what I see is that it takes this person a lot of effort and a lot of focus to convince themselves and demonstrate to themselves how their magic's going to work. People, I feel like, have this mistaken idea that pouring all of that time and energy into it is what makes the spell really big, but really it's just, to me, it's less about how much effort you've poured in and more about how much effort you have taken to cement psychologically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally in your head what is going to happen and what is happening. And it reminds me a lot of one show that I really love, and this is kind of where also, like, in case you haven't noticed, as a fantasy writer, I not only take from real books for my magical craft, I also do take from fantasy to organize my understanding of my craft. One story that I really like in that regard is the show and / manga Frieren. Frieren is so good, and it's really cool because there's a lot of magical theory in there that, yeah, sure, it has to do with its own world and its own rules, but still can very easily apply to us as well. For instance, this is spoilers now, but there is an episode where one character who's like really uncomfortable, honestly, she's kind of freaky, she has no problem doing whatever she needs to do to win, to do stuff, and she was trying to get a certification to be like a next level wizard that like a lot of our characters find ourselves taking towards the end, and she failed. Not because she couldn't pass the challenge, but because she passed it too fucking hard. Basically, in this challenge, there was one proctor of the exam wearing this invincible coat. It was a cloak of some kind that just no amount of magic could touch, could destroy, and all they had to do for the challenge was just like, I don't know, get past that cloak's defenses and just kind of like, I don't know, maybe push him a little bit or just get past that, right? Not like hurt him, not kill him especially, but just get past the cloak's defenses somehow. And so you auto-failed if you killed the guy is the thing. And so this character who walks up, everyone else is throwing fireballs and doing all this shit, and they just can't get past this cloak. But to her, the cloak is just a cloak, and it's just made of fabric. And you know what gets through fabric? Scissors. So she has a spell that can cut things, and to her, in her mind, of course, it makes perfect sense that to break a cloak, all you have to do is cut it. The only problem is when she does that, she accidentally kills the guy because she cuts through him as well. Oopsie poopsie, so she fails. But that's the point. Everyone else had it in their mind that it's an indestructible cloak, meaning it cannot be destroyed. So all of their magic was really for nothing. Whereas to her, she's like, it's still just a cloak at the end of the day. All you have to do is cut through it and you're done. That's the mental barrier that's being discussed in this. And this is where, like, one of the through lines of Frieren is that magic is a visual craft. Magic is a visual and therefore a mental craft. What you can imagine, what you can understand, dictates how effective your magic is. So it's kind of a shame, side note, at the end where all the magic just became, like, big blast-em-ups, because, like, that theory of magic is very interesting. Magic is only as powerful as your imagination, basically, is what that is saying. And that's where, again, as a fantasy writer, as people who have no problem coming up with ideas and imagining how things work, yeah, fantasy fiction writers in general, I do think, have a great opportunity to have a crossover with systems like magic, like occultism, like witchcraft, and other such hands-on mystical spirituality, because they are so easily able to visualize, picture, and understand, and just logically think through the rules of how their energy is going to move. When I put down items for a spell, they're not just because, you know, that's what books that I've read say to do. It's because they are tools and symbols and colors and shapes that give physical form to abstract concepts I'm seeking, right? Wealth is represented by green, by seeds, right? Grains and all the stability that comes with that. Love is represented by pink or red. It's represented by these colors of the flesh, of the heart, of blood, of fruits and flowers like roses and pomegranates, and all these other things. Things that you might typically see on Valentine's Day that absorb a lot of that cultural association. Things that you might put on some kind of cheese board that is a typical date night food. All of these things, these associations, are what's really helping you cement in your head how your magic is working. And it's why, as a Christian witch, when people start saying things like, oh no, you have to use X, Y, and Z item or else your spell won't work, it's very fucking dumb, because these people are telling you that their magic is weak. They're telling you that they don't have the imagination required to move past their own mental barriers. Like, I'm being so real with you when I say that there is almost no rules in magic when it comes to what items you use and how you use them and why. Certain writers and certain folks like Agrippa will insist otherwise. They'll insist that, you know, you have to abide by these specific times and specific rules, and that all these things have their specific associations and stuff. And there's some truth to that. We can also see this in a folk perspective when Joanna here is talking about a lot of that animism, a lot of the animistic qualities of these things. Like certain plants, like all plants, all stones, they are alive and have their own personalities, their own talents, their own skills. And so they like to do some things more than other things, just like people. Sure, absolutely. These ideas work together in that way. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't have a pomegranate for a love spell that you are shit out of luck, because for every one item that has that association, there's 1,000 other things, and it also depends entirely on what culture you're coming from, and therefore what cultural associations you have with that. It depends on your ability to understand how that item is linked to the thing you're asking for, and what it is that it's doing that will help you, so on and so forth, right? The reality is that the magic to do these things, though, is still coming from predominantly your own self and your connection with your patron source of divinity, whatever that is. As a Christian, that for me, that's God. All of my spells work not because I used a specific ingredient or did something at a specific time of day, but because God has seen and, God willing, accepted my request, right? That's what matters. All the rest of it is just set dressing to help me focus myself and understand myself what it is that I'm trying to do. And because of that, when people say silly things like, oh, well, you know, your spells are weaker if you don't put in all of this extra effort like I do, it makes me giggle. It makes me chuckle, because it's like, all you're really telling me is that you require a lot more convincing. You require a lot more subconscious trickery to convince yourself that the energy is moving in the way that you want it to. For us folks, where a spoken cantrip is enough, or a pen and paper is all you need, that's some powerful fucking magic, because we are literally just raw dogging it, straight up shooting it out there into the ether, knowing exactly how we want it to move, exactly how we want it to look, exactly what results we want it to bring in. We don't need to throw down 1,002 different symbols to remind ourselves how we want that to happen. We know quite explicitly already how it is. And another fun thing, again, as a fantasy writer, that I found in this Polish folk magic book, and actually that I found in multiple folk magic books, like this Italian folk magic one, and also like in a few papers on Slovenian charms, is that concept of narrative spell work. So sure, maybe there's like an herbal bath involved, or maybe there's like certain items or whatever. Maybe you have to walk around a house or a barn 3 times while saying what you're saying to get it to work, but narrative spells are exactly what they sound like. They are spells of basically our ancestors telling stories about Jesus or Mary or some saint, going through the problem that our ancestors were experiencing and overcoming it. And by telling that story, they cemented, therefore, how they themselves would overcome it with the blessing of Jesus or Mary or whatever saint was being called on. Those narrative prayers basically told the story, spoken into being, spoken into truth, and grabbed onto that method for their own aid and their own help in whatever they were doing the spell for. The more I've been looking around at my fantasy writing and also my fantasy research and how it overlaps pretty much almost into a circle of a Venn diagram with my witchy research and my witchy writing, I've come to realize that, the more I do this, the more I basically just pick apart all of the little illusions and covering and mystery, if you will, of how this magic works. And as a fantasy writer, I think that's why people with big imaginations, like, not fantasy writers specifically, I guess, people with big imaginations, people who can draw, people who can write or tell stories, people who can imagine really well, they're going to have a lot easier time doing spell work off the cuff than people who need to do a whole song and dance to convince themselves and placebo themselves into understanding how their magic is taking shape and moving. You know what I mean? So that's my thoughts on this, and I finally organized my brain enough to do that, sans all of the mess that went down last week. So I would love to know what you think. I would love to know what you feel about magic and how it works like that, because this is something that I feel like a lot of especially beginner witches get stuck on. They think they need all these tools and all these things. They don't realize what exactly it is that is happening. So let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time for some more good chats. See ya!